Are members of the committee, and we have Les Pinter, who is here in Corporation Counsel. We also have 3 ex officios, Jane Diggs, Lynn Taversack, and Dwayne Perkins are here, and members of the public. Okay, the reason we are here is we got a letter after receiving several complaints regarding noise from early morning garbage haulers, sometimes as early as 4:30 in the morning. We are requesting an ad hoc committee to be appointed to study any further measures that could be added to our present noise ordinance regarding this problem. Also, we would like to include complaints of loud noise once again bothering many neighborhoods. Your help in presenting this would be greatly appreciated. Sincerely, Fred Visconti and Dwayne Perkins, 5th Ward Common Council. Okay, seeing Mr. Visconti's on the committee, would you like to extend on this, please?
Thank you, Pauline. Through the chair, if I may, to the people who are here. Basically, what this is all about is that I received several complaints from people up in the Long Ridge area and Southern Boulevard area. Not only just the refuse haulers coming early in the morning, but other types of construction people that are starting to work early in the morning. And what we would like to do is basically to have Corporation Counsel inform us if there's anything that needs to be added to the present noise ordinance that could perhaps come up with some kind of an hour where they could begin rather than 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And that's basically what our request is all about.
I'd like to add to that because I do live in city center, and we have garbage haulers that do come in the house, like where there's 2 or 3 family houses, and I find that they're blowing their air horn because the tenants are blocking the garbage cans so they cannot pick them up, and then they beep, beep, beep going out of there. I also have complaints from the Kimberly, people that live in Kimberly. The garbage companies do go down there, pick up the A&P garbage at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning with the bang bang clanging. The same thing, blowing the air horn if somebody's blocking them, and then the backup. So it is very disturbing, and I do know what they're talking about. Les, do you want to continue?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, Fred had asked about the refuse haulers, garbage trucks in neighborhoods, and that's come up before. There isn't any ordinance, any language in this ordinance right now that directly addresses garbage haulers or refuse haulers. They were left out in part because there's some level of state oversight over motor vehicles. Motor vehicles include garbage trucks. The state retains jurisdiction over motor vehicles generally when it comes to noise. The Department of Environmental Protection, in fact, is the department that has direct oversight not only over the adoption of any noise ordinance, but over motor vehicles generally. The last time the Common Council amended this ordinance in 2006, one of the things you did was to delete some of the language about motor vehicles because the city, any municipality that tries to regulate noise from motor vehicles is that area is overseen by the state. So we had to actually extract a portion of the ordinance because of that. Now, however, I have to say this, that the state statutes regarding garbage trucks, it doesn't say anything about garbage trucks or refuse haulers or anything like that. It regulates it indirectly, meaning that what they say is that we, the state, have decided to reserve regulation of noise and pollution activity by motor vehicles to ourselves. We will adopt the standards for noise as well as pollution, and we will decide how that's to be regulated. They don't have any problem with the cities regulating the noise through the meters or whatever we do, but they reserve most of that to themselves, the oversight over motor vehicles. So, are garbage trucks and refuse vehicles motor vehicles? Yes, they are. They're within that orbit of regulation. But we looked around, and there are some municipalities that have some very, very weak attempts at regulating garbage trucks. Mostly they're in the form of adding language in the exemption portion of the ordinance. For example, in our ordinance, there are exemptions from noise restrictions for, let's give you a couple of examples. noise created as a result of an emergency. Pauline, you asked about lawn care. Lawn care is an exclusion except before 7 o'clock or after 9. That addresses your question that you had before.
Les, can I ask you another question? Is it a possibility that we can, because of the complaints I've had already this year, that we could change the hour to maybe 8 o'clock in the morning instead of 7?
That could be done. That could be
Okay.
done. Right now, that's how it was adopted in 1987, or
Right.
it was adopted originally.
It was 7 o'clock, yeah.
7 o'clock in the morning.
But
Right.
because of the fact, like, we have a lot of older people and that have been calling me who do sleep like to at least 8 o'clock. And when the lawnmower starts at 6:45, it's, you know,
You
we have a lot of working people too.
You could certainly, and not to get off the trucks for a second, but you can certainly
Right.
change that to 8, and that would conform to the daytime hours generally, which is 8 o'clock in the
Right.
morning. Okay. As far as the garbage trucks are concerned, some of the other municipalities, again, have fairly weak language. Basically, it says that refuse hauling, garbage pickup, if you will, is exempt, except that you can only haul garbage from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., for example. So it kind of works in reverse. There are a couple of municipalities that, and most of them do it that way, there are a couple of municipalities that actually set the hours. So language in here that says garbage trucks can operate between so-and-so hours and so-and-so, you know. A couple of issues to consider when it comes to regulating garbage trucks. One of them is practical, the other is legal. The practical issue first is that consider that if you have garbage pickup later in the morning, how will that impact traffic, circulation of traffic? Garbage trucks at 5, as early as it is, get around easier, pulling in, pulling out, getting around the streets. So that's one practical problem. Legal issue is if you adopt standards, time standards that are very restrictive, will you be impacting a commercial enterprise in a way that would give rise to somebody challenging it and say, well, if you only started at 8 o'clock, you basically carve out what we knew as a 3-hour or 4-hour period of time when we now can't do business. We have to change our business habits, and it's going to cost us some money. I kind of rather be on our side of the argument on that one, because so long as there's a health, safety, and welfare purpose, the city is entitled to enact legislation like this. But the further up in the day you push it, the better their case becomes in that case. So what can you do? You can either leave it to state regulation and just simply offline advise the police department to enforce garbage and refuse vehicles more vigorously using the state standards, or you can insert language in here either by way that some of the other municipalities have done it, which is as an exemption that garbage truck pickup would be exempt except between the hours of 6 or 6:30 and whatever you want to do. Okay, that takes them out of the early hours. Okay, when you have a public hearing on this, you're going to have the garbage truck guys come in. They're probably going to say, you know, if you take us 2 hours, take 2 hours away, it's going to be very difficult for us. You know, that'll have to be dealt with. So you can do that. You can do that. There is support for that. If you wanted to amend the ordinance to put some language in. One other last thing, and then I'll provide for questions, is that any change to the ordinance has to be submitted to the DEP for their approval. So if they don't like it, they will tell us that they don't like the garbage truck language. They may very well say, you can't do that because we've spoken to that issue, or they'll say it looks fine, you know, just change the hours, or they may something else. They may say something else. But whatever, before you adopt anything, the DEP will have to weigh in on that.
One question, if we have problems that, like Freddie and Dwayne have had complaints too about the garbage, is there a possibility we could possibly talk to the man who does, or the person who does haul it, or talk to the garbage pick people and say, is there a possibility, if there is a complaint in the neighborhood, could you put it on a later schedule or something?
That's absolutely available if someone wants to take that
Dwayne,
up.
do you have any questions? Because
Well, I was actually going to mention what you just said, possibly seek out the industry to see if there's something that they can do to minimize some of the noise. And like Les also mentioned, You get yourself into a difficult situation if you start restricting times, because like you said, people don't want to be blocked in by garbage trucks when they're going to work.
Right.
So we're kind of in a tight situation. But we don't want trucks out there at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning either. That's just that part.
Through the chair, if I may, to Corporation Counsel, I obviously can see the problems that would exist if we were to say that no more 4:30, 5 o'clock, you have to be there at 6 or 6:30. Then you get into the problem of, well, that's time that we normally do it, and it helps us getting in and out a lot easier. You don't have to worry about school buses, you don't have to worry about people going to work and that whole thing. So obviously there's a whole influx of arguments that could be given to us, which some of it are must admit are valid arguments. I don't know if there's some way that we could possibly reach out to the industry in itself with some kind of maybe something from this meeting or whatever, that we could possibly say to them, we've had a lot of complaints. I don't know how something like that can be done.
Well, that kind of outreach could be done through administrative channels, maybe Public Works or the mayor's office or something like that, to make some contact. I mean, there's a handful of companies, so it's not a whole universe to contact. Whether they would voluntarily comply, how they will comply, it's hard to say. If they don't comply, you still have a problem with enforcement. And enforcement is always an issue, because I don't know if the police department goes around with meters or has meters or does it anyway. I don't know what kind of enforcement there would be, because there's a lot of things in the noise ordinance that need enforcing, and perhaps with limited manpower or limited equipment, there's only so much you'll be able to do anyway. So whether people will be able to track garbage trucks, it's another practical issue that's out there. But when the noise ordinance was originally adopted, the Common Council Committee at that time was aware that it may be impossible to actually enforce every single provision, but by the public profile of the enactment of the ordinance, or any amendment like this one, the public profile will be out there, so that garbage guys will see that, as will the other people who have noise violations, and they'll be aware. And they'll be legally aware also that it's out there. Even if you don't enforce it ever, the fact that it's an enacted ordinance or an amendment will give it a public message, will provide the public message.
I do know I do have one home in my neighborhood who every Saturday morning they block the garbage truck. The garbage truck lays on the air horn for 15 to 20 minutes waiting for that guy to come out and move his car. And then it's beep, beep, beep all the way back. But what they should do is they should warn the people. You block it again, we're not going to pick up the garbage. There should be some, because it's the same house week after week after week that people complain about.
For me, through the chair, just to get off that subject very quickly, I'd like to just touch on the loud music problem. It hasn't been as bad as the other problem that we're discussing this evening. And what I did is I turned that over to the unit, Rich Antos and his people, and they have they visited the neighborhood that was involved. It involves, unfortunately, the volleyball games again and cars all over the place. So they are aware of that problem. It's only been in one area, and they're working on it to see if it can be illegal.
Shay, any questions?
No, actually, through the chair, just to kind of recap what was previously stated by Corporation Counsel. We can possibly send a letter from the city to the local trash haulers, letting them know our concerns. That would not mean we would have to necessarily amend the ordinance, which means it would not have to go back through DEP as well. As far as, so that's one option, right? The other option is to go ahead and amend it to include the language that was, correct me if I'm wrong, but the language that was previously eliminated back in 1986 or 87 I mean, technically, we can't. There's a reason why we didn't include it at that time, with the motor vehicle portion.
Fairly much the same reason that we wouldn't be able to include a lot about motor vehicles because it's a regulated area by the state. But again, as I said before, we can include language on garbage trucks, subject to the DEP saying to us, look, you're restricting it too much. We cover that area. I think we can get away with some restriction on that. That's what I'm trying to say, that even though the motor vehicles are more or less covered in terms of the regulation, we can get away with something. You know, in other words, reasonable regulation. I think DEP would probably be okay with that in the ordinance. But you're right. The voluntary is the first step. Leaving it to state regulation, you know, and maybe trying to encourage the state to do more enforcement is another way. Third way is to go and put something in the ordinance and hope the DEP says that's okay.
Okay. And through the chair, again, in your professional legal opinion, would it first make sense to go ahead and send out a letter like Fred was talking about to possibly again create the awareness? Maybe they'll be more cognizant about blowing the horn. You know, maybe they'll tell their drivers to think twice before, you know, doing certain things, and maybe see how that works. It sounds like Fred has already addressed the music situation with the unit, and has that been fairly successful?
So far, but
Okay.
they're still working on it. This weekend should see what happens with it.
Okay, so that aspect of it has been taken care of, so it's still the garbage trucks, and Pauline has the issue in her neighborhood as well. And maybe if we try that route first, see how that transpires.
That's a very prudent move because you'll be able to gauge a reaction
Right.
On their part to see how much opposition you might have if you did amend it later.
You know what I think it is? Come summertime, the garbage trucks go out even earlier because it's lighter at 4:30 in the morning. It's light out. They can see the roads. They can see what's going on. Come, like, when it comes wintertime, I never hear the garbage trucks come in, and, I mean, at that time in the morning, even because it's darker, and I think they come out a little bit later. Yeah, but I think it has a lot to do with the light and the weather, so it's a lot easier for them to get around.
From what I could see from some of the other places, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock seems to be the time when they say, okay, you can begin. 6 o'clock.
I don't know.
6, 7, like that. Because a lot of other things are later, at 8. But that one, they recognize apparently the garbage business is that way, so they don't want to restrict them to 8 o'clock. They want to start at 6 o'clock. Okay. Don't do it at 4:30 or 5:30, 6 o'clock, you know, so they try to balance it out.
Lynn, do you have any questions?
Not questions. I'm wondering if we can't use our technology on an issue like this. We do have a 311 system that can target neighborhoods, for instance, so that if we got complaints from Long Ridge or Southern Boulevard, it would be possible to contact all the people in that area and ask, you know, are you being awakened by early garbage removal? Please let us know, because Danbury, I mean, you could have 7 or 8 different haulers working those streets, couldn't you, Freddie?
There are.
Yeah.
They usually
And,
are run by the same people.
And they compete, and I think that if we find out that there's a particular hauler that's just not being courteous, that competition can perhaps correct some of these problems. People will go with a company that's going to be more courteous and more sensitive to the early hour pickups.
They're
Wayne,
cheaper.
any questions?
Yeah, I just had a comment. I'd be a little hesitant to start any kind of wording that would begin to restrict commerce from, say, 7 to 8 o'clock. And from, I think they can start at 8 o'clock on Saturdays, I believe, because that's been a standard for a long time. And to cut back that whole entire hour, I believe would cause some serious problems from a lot of different areas. That's the only thing I have to say on that.
Jane?
Through the chair, I have some questions, Pauline, in terms of the changes to these, in terms of the changes to the ordinance. Are we trying to make changes only for the garbage haulers? And I know, Fred, you had mentioned the loud music. Let's just say if I have a party at my house, but my neighbor feels that our music is just a bit too loud, what happens? So is this ordinance going to impact on live music?
Jane, if you read the ordinance...
I don't have it in front of me.
I know, but if you read the ordinance says that quiet time is 8 o'clock noise time is from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night.
Noise time.
Pardon?
Noise time.
Noise time is at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Noise time, and that's
Noise time.
your interpretation of noise time. 'Cause
Yes,
see,
it
your
says-
interpretation of noise time may not be my interpretation of noise time.
But you got to remember, it also says that, like on Sundays and on Saturdays, the night is between 8 and 10 a.m.
10
No,
p.m.
10 at night. No, the nighttime hours, no. Daytime hours are 8 to 8.
Well, then,
Monday through
That's a boring
Saturday,
part.
and then the hours 10 a.m. to 8 o'clock on Sundays. That's noise hours, 10 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night on Sundays. But other than that, they're 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. If you have a neighbor who's having a party and their music is really, really loud, you can call the police, and the police just goes over, says, please turn down your music, and that's done. And it's usually, you usually don't even have a problem. But 90% of the time, when you have a party or something like that, and your neighbor has a party, your neighbor invites you to the party, so they're not disturbing you, if they're good neighbors. They invite you. But if you want to see this, Jane, I can send this down. You can read this.
that's okay, Madam Chair. I'm fine.
Okay, you're fine? Okay. Lynn, your question?
Respectfully, yes. Two things that concern me. If you change the hours too much, the garbage trucks that have garbage in have to dump at AWD. If you restrict the amount of hours, it's going to back up quite a bit, and it's already pretty full most of the time. So that could be one reason they pick up as early as they do. And respectfully, we are members in Danbury of HRRA. That is part of the trash hauling industry. Consequently, you could ask your mayor or whomever to send a letter to HRRA and to the haulers through HRRA. You'd have more power, or as much power there doing it that way as any other way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Anyone else like to make a comment?
Through the chair to Councilwoman Diggs. One of the reasons we adopted a noise ordinance is that you don't have to live next to somebody that's having a loud party without having some kind of way to call the police or whoever it may be, and have them not shut the party down, but at least turn the music down. That's what the noise ordinance is all about. And that's why it's there.
But this originally started, I can remember when this came up, was because in fact we were having the problem down at, behind Freddie's house,
Rogers Park.
and we had that problem. And this is why this new ordinance came about last time. But I do know that. Does anybody have a motion?
Okay,
Shay?
thank you. Well, at this time, I'd like to make a motion to to authorize, I don't know what necessarily what department in the city, maybe Corporation Council can determine that, whether it be Public Works, the mayor's office, et cetera, to send out an appropriate letter to the trash haulers in the area, addressing the noise, the noise situation in the mornings. Again, to make them more cognizant, more aware of what's going on. A lot of times, the drivers are blowing the horn, but the company never hears about it, so they don't know. So something of that effect, like you said, the first step and see how that, see if there's improvement, see if you're still getting complaints.
Through the chair, can I make an amendment to
Yeah.
that? And include Mrs. Waller's idea of sending it to the HRRA, which would give us a lot more clout
Sure.
from them.
Yeah, yeah.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, do we have any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Do we have a motion
Move
to?
to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Okay, meeting adjourned.